Have you heard of the theory of multiple intelligences? The basic premise of this theory, originally formulated by Howard Gardner in the early 1980s, is that there are different ways that you can be smart. Some people are verbally smart. They're good at talking and reading and comprehending. Some people are mathematically smart, logically smart. They're good at mathematics and logic puzzles. Some people are kinesthetically gifted. They're good at movement and body control and dance, physical therapy. Some people are visually smart. They're good at art, design, or even packing a suitcase or the trunk of a car. Some people are especially smart with animals or with nature and connections to the natural world. And some are interpersonally smart, what we might call schmooze smart. They just know how to connect with you, how to connect with other people. They may be terrible at math. They may never read a book, but they know people. This theory of multiple intelligences was very attractive because it was affirming. Everybody gets to be smart. Everybody wins. It's inclusive. There are many different styles of success and insight and giftedness. It's also a corrective to historically an overemphasis on the verbal side and the mathological side as the only ways to be truly smart. And for many people, they personally resonated with this concept. It rang true to their experience. They didn't know how to pack a suitcase, but they could read for hours and hours. There is just one big problem with the theory of multiple intelligences, and that is that there is a basic lack of clear evidence or experimental demonstration that that's actually how it works. The leading experts in neurology and psychology all say it's not accurate in describing how the brain works. Now, it is true that the word intelligence can be subjective, and saying some people are smarter than others can be a loaded process. But it may just be that there are other clearly defined and definable categories and factors like processing speed or cultural conditioning that could have more to say about how one's results are on an intelligence test. So I ask you, why does the multiple intelligence theory live on after the experts have said it just ain't so? Well, it resonates with our subjective experience. It helps explain that C that we got in gym or in chemistry, as it wasn't our fault, just not how our brains are wired. It lives on because we want it to be true. Now, ideally, we would trust the science in that new phrase, but science can be a Grinch, a Scrooge, a curmudgeon who says no when we long for a yes, or even a maybe. In Europe, in the 17th and 18th century, 1600s, 1700s, we saw a scientific revolution. And building on that scientific revolution, we saw a philosophical and political movement start called the Enlightenment, which promised to run knowledge and society like science. You look for evidence. You use your reason to evaluate the evidence. You conduct experiments to test your theories. You use logic. And if you use those pieces of evidence and reason and logic, you could reliably discover the truth and then demonstrate the truth again in a laboratory or in a legislature. It could apply everywhere in life. We also found, coming out of that Enlightenment idea, a more humanist approach to life. It was focused on human power and knowledge. It was not looking for miracles or revelations to tell us the truth. We could improve the world and the human condition by what people could do. We would make the lame walk. We would help the blind to see. As the old slogan at the Technion University in Haifa used to say, miracles happen, they take a lot of work. This revolution in science and knowledge and ability led to a kind of optimism. And I want to read to you a short passage by Robert Ingersoll from the late 19th century who was a critic of religion, but also an apostle for science in his era. He actually lived in Illinois for many years, was the governor of Illinois for a time, or maybe attorney general of Illinois. He wanted to run for governor, but they said he had to tone down his atheism, and he said no. So he made a career as a public speaker in an era of public speakers. Here's what Ingersoll had to say, comparing the benefits of theology and science. When the theologian governed the world, it was covered with huts and hovels for the many, palaces and cathedrals for the few. To nearly all the children of men, reading and writing were unknown arts. The poor were clad in rags and skins. They devoured crusts and gnawed bones. The day of science dawned, and the luxuries of a century ago are the necessities of today. Men in the middle ranks of life have more of the conveniences and elegancies than the princes and kings of theological times. But above and over all of this is the development of mind. There is more of value in the brain of an average person of today, a master mechanic, a chemist, a naturalist, an inventor, than there was in the brain of the whole world 400 years ago. With Wikipedia, maybe we've gone back in the other direction. Empty our brains, upload it to the web. Well, the hope then was that human knowledge, and especially science, would fix the world. And then the 20th century. And we saw poison gas and nuclear weapons and pollution and all the ways that science is a tool to be used for good or for evil. The problems that we are dealing with today in terms of accepting and promoting science are not only because of the bad results of the last century. Even in the 19th century, there was an early reaction against the Enlightenment and to some extent the scientific revolution. There were traditional religions that rejected its conclusions. Baruch Spinoza, for example, was expelled from the Jewish community in Amsterdam because he dared to say that maybe Moses didn't write the entire Torah, and maybe the laws in the Torah didn't apply to Jews not living in a state defined by Jewish law. And maybe, just maybe, that God that's described is the universe itself and not a separate cognizant being that intervenes in the world and blesses and curses and reveals text. Expelled. Galileo dared to say it moves, referring to the earth and not the sun. And another generation, Darwin, dared to say that we are not the pinnacle of creation in 6 days. We are the result of an evolution of millions and even billions of years. Well, it was not only that confrontation with religion, it was also the fact that some modern people didn't like how this new world of science and reason felt. I want to share with you a selection from a John Keats poem called Lamia, written in 1819. Do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy? There was an awful rainbow once in heaven. We know her woof, her texture. She is given in the dull catalogue of common things. Philosophy will clip an angel's wings, conquer all mysteries by rule and line, empty the haunted air and gnomed mine, unweave a rainbow. Philosophy, that's cold. That doesn't care. There's no emotion. There's no joy or excitement. That rainbow used to symbolize a covenant with God to not flood the world. And now it's the splitting of light by a prism. It's part of what he says, the dull catalog of common. It's just a rainbow. No more angels because philosophy has clipped their wings. No more mysteries because you've got the rules and the lines and you measure everything out. No haunted air, no magic, no gnomes living in the mind. Even the rainbow is unwoven into its pieces. This is not someone who wants to go back to a traditional religion, but it's someone who laments what science does to our experience of the world. So we certainly had those religious thinkers who had a belief based on tradition and faith. That was one of the stumbling blocks that science faced. When you claim an unchanging truth forever, and now someone wants to change things, that's going to be a confrontation. And sometimes they're even willing to point out some of the absurdities in the tradition. So I'll give you one example from Jewish life. You may have heard the PR line that Jewish tradition commands 613 commandments that everyone is expected to follow. And it's a sign of how ethical we are that we have 613 commandments that we're all supposed to follow. The problem is that no one person can ever follow all 613 because some of them apply to women and some of them apply to men. Some of them apply to kings, and some of them apply to priests, and some of them apply to farmers, and some of them apply to people in the city, and some apply in the land of Israel, and some apply outside the land of Israel. No one person could be all of those things and fulfill all those commandments. And it's also worth noting, this just came up in the Daf Yomi, the daily Talmud study in the last week, that the very concept of that number, 613, was invented by the rabbis. There's no numbering system in the Torah that you can find. The rabbi said, there must be 613 because the gematria, the number value of the letters for the word Torah is 611, and then there were two that God said separately. So it's a number, it's a PR element. It's not based on fact. But of course, that's the scientific mind looking for evidence. Where does it say? Well, you're going to get in trouble if you say it in the wrong synagogue. The other challenge that religion poses to science is that if your identity, if your community, including your basic connections to your family, are based on these beliefs, it's very hard to change your mind because it's who you are. It's not just what you think. The second stumbling block that science had is that question of emotion, the feeling. We want to believe things sometimes because we feel them to be true. Our imagination tells us the world makes more sense this way. Jonathan Haidt, in his wonderful book, The Righteous Mind, describes the human mind as if it were an elephant ridden by a human being trying to steer. The elephant is our instincts, our emotions, our psychology happening below the surface. And the steerer, the human being, is our rational mind. It can sometimes direct the elephant. But if the elephant wants to go in a certain direction, the elephant is going where the elephant wants to go. A third stumbling block for science is that science is a human project, and therefore it's flawed. There have been terribly unethical experiments conducted, knowledge pursued, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments or the experiments in Auschwitz in the 20th century. There's the profit motive for shareholders of pharmaceutical corporations, which cast questions on their recommendations. Science has been exploited for an economic agenda, like the tobacco industry, funding all these studies to cast doubt on the cancerousness of smoking, or the climate change controversy. You may have seen some recent interviews with Robert Kennedy, who is currently the head of our Health and Human Services Department. And he said some things that people on the left, for sure, were very upset at. He was questioning the efficacy of vaccines, or why not just take vitamin C in chicken soup instead? He even promised to investigate something called chemtrails, which is a conspiracy theory that all those vapor trails you see from planes are actually disseminating chemicals to conduct mind control. And he said, I'm going to appoint someone to look into that. Now, we might say this is silly. We might say this is dangerous. But I have to ask you, do you really trust drug companies to always do the right thing? Do you really trust industry to manage pollutants all by itself? Do you trust the government to always tell you the whole truth? Well, I mean, this is the dilemma, you see. Science is a human project. And so we have to question sometimes. And the last stumbling block that science has, and this is maybe the most basic, is that science can be hard. I'll share my own experience. I had to struggle through high school chemistry and high school physics. Half the time, I only understood the physics until after the test. Like, we graded the test, then I understood it. I did well on the final, but the homework, the labs, it was like talking another language that I didn't understand. And I had a friend who would read the chapter the night before the test and get an A. Drove me crazy. But I didn't realize until this year that I'm also going to have to remember this science 30 years later to help my children with their science homework for them to learn about it. And sometimes I say to Jonah, I haven't done this in 30 years. There's just no way. Science sometimes gives you unclear answers. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that anytime we try to find the location of an atom, it's going to be off by a certain amount. And we can't measure the speed and location of that atom at the same time. There are conflicting explanations for certain phenomena. Is light an energy wave? Is light a particle affected by gravity? The answer is yes. And changing answers all the time, even changing conventional wisdom. One of the funniest scenes in any Woody Allen movie that I've seen is when he's unfrozen from being in stasis for decades. And they say he ran a health food store that sold grains and seeds. And the scientist says to the other researcher, well, hadn't they heard of steak and deep fat? Oh, they thought that was bad for you. See, nutrition recommendations change all the time. And we saw this happening in real time during the COVID epidemic. Masking and COVID. When to wear masks, when not to wear masks. Are masks effective or not effective? Did they tell the truth to preserve some of that PPE for the hospitals? I had a child at a summer camp when summer camp started up again. And they required COVID tests before the kids went. And they required the kids to wear masks whenever they were around. They didn't wear masks in the dining hall because, of course, they had to eat. And they didn't wear masks while sleeping because they didn't want them to strangle themselves on the cords of the masks. So they were in rooms with people breathing. They then posted some pictures, as summer camps do. And one of the pictures was of a child swinging on a zip line with a mask on. And I thought, and one of the parents commented on this and said, how wonderful that you're following the science. And I thought to myself, the science says when you're outdoors and you're away from people, you can't get it. It just disperses too fast. By then we knew that, or at least some of us knew that. But seeing a kid on a zip line, moving fast, distance from and still wearing a mask, I thought, there's something else going on here that isn't the science. Because the wisdom changed, the knowledge changed. I remember taking walks outside in masks early on before we knew. But if the knowledge changes, your behavior changes. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it does mean you have to be a little flexible. And that makes science hard, to see science happening in real time with those kind of variables. But this might be one of the most important reasons that science is important. We have to learn the humility of true human knowledge, that sometimes it's partial. Sometimes we don't know everything. We have to learn that the world does not match our initial impressions or doesn't match what we want it to be. If we get used to a world where knowledge and recommendations change, where we can't control everything that happens, where it's not going to turn out the way we want it to be, then maybe we'll be more balanced when our experiences or other people are just uncooperative with what we want. We learn to live with a world that doesn't match what we want. Of course, science also matters because it works. It describes the world the way it actually is, using evidence and experiment and demonstration and analysis. Science enables us to understand ourselves, too. How the brain functions is not a black box anymore. When Freud began his career as a doctor in the 1870s, he wanted to be a neuroscientist, but they had no way to study how the brain worked. No diodes, no CAT scans, no PET scans. And so he shifted into psychology, half of which he made up, or he drew from anecdotal evidence, but not scientific neutral evidence. In the end, though, he was guessing. He made good guesses sometimes. But the point was that he couldn't study us and how we think and how we function in a way that we can now. In many ways, Robert Ingersoll was right. The world is immeasurably better because of what science has done, even with the evil and the mistakes that have contributed to human misery. At its best, science is universal. It's a shared project of studying the world that we know, from the subatomic to the cosmos, and then doing our best with that knowledge. Absolutely, there is cultural conditioning involved. There are biological differences between populations. It's not just the same between genders and between races and other groups. We have to be aware of human fallibility and limits. We do not have blind faith in science or in scientists to always do what is morally right or to even be accurate, and sometimes they're wrong. But if you visit an advanced laboratory in the world, or you look at elite programs at universities, and you'll see the wide range of humanity involved in this shared project to know and to do. Last year, I officiated at a tragic funeral for a family who are world-renowned economists. Their son died very suddenly. And I convened a virtual Shiva for them a day or two after the service. And they had friends and colleagues connecting from every corner of the globe and every language you could imagine and multiple religions, all coming to offer their human condolences. But what it also demonstrated to me is this global community of knowledge that is trying to study human behavior and improve society. And that's what they were doing in their professional work outside of offering human commiseration. Now, John Keats was wrong. Science is not the opposite of imagination. It takes imagination to wonder, to explore, and then to predict and to test and to predict again if we're wrong. And the intersection of science and imagination is the birthplace of science fiction. It's creativity and storytelling informed by what we know is and by what we make an educated guess might be. Now, I do want to say that Ingersoll might have been wrong as well as right. Science is not necessarily the opposite of religion. You may have heard of a medieval rabbi named Maimonides before he became part of a school system. Maimonides was a renowned rabbi and also a philosopher and also an active physician, studying medicine to the best of his knowledge in the era in which he lived, in the 13th century. And today, some medical schools actually use a text called the Oath of Maimonides. It turns out that text was written in the 18th century in Germany and claimed it went back to Maimonides to get more fame. That's what science will do, right? It finds the truth. But even with the religious language of this Oath of Maimonides, you'll hear the idealism of the Enlightenment, the incremental knowledge of science, and the importance of this collective quest for truth. The eternal providence has appointed me to watch over the life and health of your creatures. May the love for my art motivate me at all times. May neither greed nor miserliness, nor thirst for glory, nor for a great reputation engage my mind. For the enemies of truth and loving humanity could easily deceive me and make me forget my worthy goal of doing good to your children. May I never see in the patient anything but a fellow creature in pain. Grant me the strength, time, and opportunity always to correct what I have acquired, always to extend its domain. For knowledge is immense, and the spirit of man can extend indefinitely to enrich itself daily with new requirements. Today he can discover his errors of yesterday, and tomorrow he can obtain a new light on what he thinks himself sure of today. O God, you have appointed me to watch over the life and death of your creatures. Here I am ready for my vocation, and now I turn to my calling. In other words, it's up to us to discover, to learn, to do good, and then to learn some more.